Hi, welcome back to another segment of the Grassy Knoll. We're still standing this 11th of October, 2006. We have with us today, I can say, it's a little cliche, but nevertheless true. You know, they need no introduction. It's the Collins brothers, Philip and Paul. You first heard them on this show with regard to their jointly written book called The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship. Since then, they both have a number of titles to their credit, and what we're going to do today is talk about a recent article called In Bed with the Enemy. You can find that on conspiracyarchive.com. Go to commentary and you'll see it right there. That is In Bed with the Enemy. So if you want to read along with us, or if you want to just consult it as we go along an hour later, there it is. And thanks, guys, for coming back to the show.
Thanks, Viz.
Alrighty. Well, I'll tell you what. This is a very strange chapter with regard especially to, I think, Republican doings. And, of course, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, but they've done some interesting things with the Islam and Arab communities, and I think you're going to share that with us today. So why don't you take off with it?
Okay. Well, I start off by pointing out in my article that Huey Long once asserted that fascism would show up in the United States as anti-fascism. Now, different people feel different ways about Huey Long. Some people think he was a demagogue. Other people think that he was a populist hero. I believe that the truth lies somewhere in the middle with that guy. But whatever you feel about him, his assertion there is actually quite sound and probably hits the nail on the head. We had the president holding this press conference at his Texas ranch, if you can call it a ranch. But
you mean that Hollywood setup there? Or?
Yeah, there you go. You know, that Monica up there in Texas, where he basically said that what we're dealing with, that the terrorists are Islamic fascists. Now, in my article, I point out that I believe that the president's contention about these Arab terrorists is by and large correct. That if you listen to some of the things that they say, there's very little difference between them and a goose-stepping, die-in-the-wool, ideological Nazi. If you look at some of these different groups, if you look at for instance, the PLO, you look at their leader who passed away not too long ago, Yasser Arafat, who was probably one of the worst terrorists ever. Most people don't remember his different escapades and the different horrible things he was involved in. He was taught by Otto Skorzeny, the Nazi, and a lot of Nazi tactics, guerrilla tactics, are used by these guys, and a lot of the same beliefs are shared in common with the Nazis. And so, so there does seem to be some truth in what the president was saying. But the problem is that when you look at the state of American government nowadays, and if you look at what's going on in the government, you start to determine that there is a huge amount of hypocrisy in Bush's statement, because two things are going on simultaneously here. The government, on one hand, is denouncing Islamofascism, and then, on the other hand, we see criminal factions in the government actually connected to these terrorists. So Islamofascism, in my article, I contend, is not just the refuge for fanatics, but instead it is a government-sponsored, state-sponsored enterprise involving individuals in our government, which L. Fletcher Prouty would have referred to as a secret team, a shadow government that is basically latched onto the legitimate constitutional government. And these guys are basically what's keeping these Islamofascists going. And the individual that I basically saw as connecting the government to the terrorist network was an individual named Grover Norquist. Now, Norquist is a GOP Bush operative. Many people probably know that he was involved in getting the president's support and approval rating up amongst Islamic people here in the United States. And Nation magazine has referred to him as the Field Marshal of the Bush Plan. But Norquist is basically tied to these different Islamo-fascist groups, namely through his lobbying firm, Janus Merit Strategies, which is a lobbyist for the Islamic Institute, and for the American Muslim Council. Now, the head of the American Muslim Council is Abdurrahman Alamoudi, and Alamoudi was at an anti-Israel protest outside of the White House, and that was back in 2000, and it was pretty much around this time of year. And he basically came out saying that he was a supporter of Hamas and Hezbollah at this meeting. And, of course, both of those groups, the State Department has listed as terrorist organizations. Another individual that's spoken at the American Muslim Council's meetings is an individual named Sami al-Arian. And he is a Kuwaiti-born Palestinian. He's a professor at a university in Florida. And he was at one of the meetings of the American Muslim Council, and at this meeting he called out all the different stuff that we would recognize as the jihadist message. He called for the death of Israel. He called for for Islam moving into Jerusalem and all of that great stuff. And the thing is that in 2000, al-Arian got to meet George and Laura Bush at a mosque in Tampa with a group of other Muslim leaders. And this whole thing was, of course, brokered by Norquist. Now, Norquist has even deeper ties into Islam than that. For instance, we know that he's married a Muslim woman, and clearly he would not be able to do that unless he himself had converted to Islam, because Muslim women are only allowed to marry Muslim men. Strict tradition. The woman he married is a woman named Sama al-Rayas, and she's a Palestinian Muslim. Her name is now, of course, Sama Norquist. But the interesting thing I noticed about her was that she is an employee of the U.S. Agency for International Development. And that, of course, brings us back to something that we've spoken about before. Because the Agency for International Development was involved in a radicalization project amongst Muslim people. They used the Afghan invasion by the Soviets as a pretext for bringing in violent textbooks to Afghan children to essentially radicalize them with a violent form of Islam. And those books were made at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and it was made with a grant from the Agency for International Development, and the agency spent $51 million from about 84 to 94 on this project. So what I suggest is that Norquist and his wife are a husband-wife group involved in the business of radicalization. And Norquist turning to Islam would actually help him to solidify ties between the Islamo-fascist and the government. So now people might wonder, well, what is this man? Is he working for them? Is he working for the government? Who is he working for? And the question is both. The answer to that question is both, because what you got to understand is a lot of these operatives that are involved in erecting what we would call the New World Order are basically double and triple agents. They understand that no matter what side wins, that the ends are the same, and they want to be involved in both. I mean, they want to be just involved so that whoever comes out on top, they end up sharing some kind of stake in that future. Another good example that illustrates my point is Henry Kissinger. Kissinger was involved with and made an honorary member of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which has caused some individuals, namely those within the LaRouche trajectory, to say that he's a British agent here in the United States. But if you look back at his Army days, he was also, there's considerable amount of evidence that he was a Soviet mole.
Hold on a second. Paul?
Yeah.
What I'm going to suggest, Philip, you there?
Yeah.
Paul, you want to grab yourself some water?
Yeah, let me just grab a drink real fast.
Okay, yeah, I mean, because that sounds painful for you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, Philip, I tell you what, why don't we talk about where your writings can be read across a number of websites. You want to pick that up for us now?
And tell them about the ebook too.
Sure. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Due to popular demand, much like a commercial, but due to popular demand, we are now converting the Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, the expanded revised edition. We are now converting it to ebook format, and it will be available via a closer look, www.4@closerlook.com, and that's of course the official website of A Closer Look, which broadcasts out of Denver, Colorado, and is hosted by Michael Corbin. This version will be pretty much the electronic version. It might even feature some additional graphics and a little bit of new information. Also, all of our writings, of the most comprehensive collection of them, has been pretty much compiled by our good friend Terry Melanson, who hosts Conspiracy Archive, and they can be found at www.conspiracyarchive, all one word, conspiracyarchive.com/commentary with a capital C /Collins with a capital C .php. But if you have trouble remembering all that, just go to www.conspiracyarchive.com, click the commentary link, and the list of commentators will appear, and Paul and I are amongst the commentators there, and all you have to do is click that link and you're instantly taken there. There you'll find not only articles, but you'll also find some archived audio from other interviews that we've done. And it's one of the most comprehensive collections of our writings on the internet, and Terry has done just a fabulous job with it. So, yeah, that's where a majority of our work can be found.
Are you thinking about collating any or all of the articles and putting that in hard copy or ebook?
That's a very good question. As I understand it, there was somebody who was compiling all of our articles and basically distributing it as an ebook. They were pretty much doing that as their own endeavor, but I was considering putting together all of our essays into one comprehensive tome and everything. If we can get around to doing that, we have so many other projects on the burner right now. So, of course, that's one project, that's pretty much on the drawing board, so to speak. Yeah.
I was going to say, it's interesting today that we're talking about Grover Norquist, because something that struck me way back when was this duality. I think that's what we're talking about today, which is kind of confusing and doesn't really make sense to me either. Whereas they could be currying favor with the Arab community, with the Islamic community, and at the same time declaring them more or less, and this is before 9/11, but also declaring them a problem and radical and a threat to Christianity. And this whole situation with Sammy Al-Arian I find very, very curious, because that happened in our own backyard here. And, you talk about the right to a speedy trial, and this guy Actually, we believe he got sent to a prison that had like probably 3 people in it, about 50 miles north of where we are, a brand new facility. And we always wondered, like, what was going on? And when does this guy finally get his day in court? Now, I'm not pro or against him, but I do believe that the United States was never, ever a target for his rhetoric. It was rather Israel that was. And there's some curiousness about whether or not Genshaft, who was president in and around that time, had anything to do with facilitating, shall we say, his departure from the faculty. Now, of course, universities do have a policy that if you do anything that brings the university into, shall we say, an ill light, if you will, that could be grounds for dismissal. And on that, it may be legitimate. But like I said, we've had this duality, not only with Norquist and the Republican Party and Islam, but also with Al-Arian and Bush. So that's as far as I can bring it here. That's all I really wanted to add. And if you guys want to pick it up, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I'm back. Well, on that duality, again, a lot of these guys that are involved, the covert operatives and these different individuals that are involved in creating the New World Order, they play almost every single side. We're talking about double and triple agents.
Mm-hmm.
The different factions of the elite, they know one of them are going to top out and become the top dog in the end, and become the dominant interest in this New World Order. So they want to have some kind of stake in that future. And so, again, Henry Kissinger is a big example of this. There's evidence that he worked for the Soviets. There's also evidence that he worked for the British elite. And so what you got is you have a guy that is basically, that knows that the end is going to be one of these groups of the elites actually ascending. And we see the same thing with Grover Norquist. Well, is he working for the Islamofascists, or is he working for the government, for the United States government? And the answer is really, it's both. And you have to understand how the game is played, and that and what they understand in the deep politics that are involved here.
Well, let me ask you a question, Paul. Okay?
Okay.
Because I think I won't derail your thought, but now even with the whole idea of the Arab community and whether it's Islam or whatever, not that all Arabs are necessarily Muslim, but do you find there's also a little special treatment among all the Middle Eastern states people, something that's a little bit different when you're dealing with Saudis?
Oh yes, exactly. Well, let me tell you a little story on that note. I know guys that work in intelligence, and when we do talk, we talk a lot. Now, I have never received what I could call a smoking gun from these guys. A matter of fact, I would liken sitting and speaking to them to sitting in a coffee shop having a discussion with Alan Greenspan, actually, and all. You end up, you're 15 minutes into the conversation, it's driving you nuts, and you want to stick sodium pentothal into his mocha just to get a straight answer. That's what it's a lot like. But I'll tell you, if you know what to ask, and you know how to ask it, it's funny what falls out. And I was talking to this guy that works in intelligence, and he works over here in this state here at Wright-Patterson. And I said to him, I said, look, I know that you can't tell me, straight on forward on certain issues, certain things. So I just want to throw this at you as a little hypothesis that I have and that other people have. And I said, we have this problem with an insurgency in Iraq, and I said, you know, it looks to me that these guys there in Iraq might be actually being funded by or supported in some way by big oil and by their Saudi allies. Because what it does is it basically keeps the oil infrastructure down, and it keeps the Iraqi oil off the market, keeps the prices nice and high, and it also actually gives kind of a boost to the peak oil crowd, you know. And it does, because for 2 or 3 years there, I believed peak oil. And the signs and indicators to me seemed to be there in the prices and in the supposed scarcity, and all. When and I didn't really consider the fact that some of this oil could have been being kept off the markets through the war on terror. And so I said, maybe these oil companies and maybe the Saudis, their Saudi allies, are somehow supporting these guys over in Iraq to keep that oil from getting on the Iraqi market. And this guy said to me, he said, I can't tell you you're right, I can't tell you that you're wrong. What I will tell you is that is a very interesting hypothesis, and I would continue working with that and everything. And that was his way of telling me. Yeah. And so that goes back to what you're saying with the Saudis. The Saudis, there seems to be this hands-off thing with them, and yet they seem to be the biggest exporters of terrorism next to Pakistan. Yeah. Pakistan seems to have this kind of hands-off kind of mentality at work there as well.
What's also interesting is, Paul, with regard to Saudi Arabia, they supposedly have one of the most militant groups there, which is the Wahhabis, right?
Right.
But, on the other hand, and we've also heard about how Faisal's house is going to crash, and they're going to get overtaken, and Qatar is going to come on as like the big poobah down there. All this stuff comes and goes about the Saudis, but it's like nothing ever happens, and they seem to be like the consummate businessmen among the Middle Eastern states.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, I believe that there's a little bit of truth to that whole threat, although I believe that they just periodically bring that up to get support from the West.
Okay.
And everything.
Okay.
Now, I do believe that while they support these terrorists, that the Frankenstein monster can turn on the doctor, so to speak, because they don't want any of these groups back in Saudi Arabia. They're like, please don't send them here, they'll tear us down.
Well, isn't Mecca in Saudi Arabia?
I believe so. Don't quote me as gospel truth on that, but I believe you're right.
Yeah, because I also think that's a situation, too, where if anything happens there, that could really ignite the whole Middle East. And, of course, a lot of people have their glasses on, so to speak, to keep an eye on this in the event there would be, say, a desecration in Mecca blamed on the West. You can see where that's going, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
All right, so, go ahead.
No. Well, in my article, what I end up doing is looking for evidence that Norquist might be the shepherd for government-sponsored terrorists. And the evidence that I found lies with this group called Green Quest. And Operation Green Quest was basically a Treasury Department task force. And this group was like gangbusters. They were absolutely magnificent. They were going after individuals and organizations that seemed to be fronts for Islamic terrorism. And Grover Norquist basically led the charge against Green Quest and basically called the raids civil rights violations and kind of condemned the whole thing on the grounds of civil rights. Now, what I say in my article, and I contend, is that Norquist is probably not so much concerned about civil rights as he's concerned about what an investigation of these different groups will bring out. And it will bring out basically connections to the government and to several different elites. If you look at one of the targets that Green Quest went after, they went after Jamal Barzenji. He was listed as a representative of the World Assembly of Muslim Youth. And this brings us right back to the Saudis that you were just talking about, because they are an arm of the Saudi regime, and they're located in Virginia. But back prior to September 11th, the Bush administration had effectively blocked an FBI investigation into the World Assembly of Muslim Youth. They killed it. And the thing is that Abdullah bin Laden, who is Osama's younger brother, is president of the World Assembly of Muslim Youth. And an investigation probably would have brought out that Osama is not a black sheep by any stretch of the imagination, but instead that terrorism is actually the family business, which wouldn't have been good for Bush, because Bush is tied to bin Laden through Carlyle and through Arbusto Energy. We know that James Bath, who is probably some kind of CIA operative, it's been suggested at least. We know he went to work for Salim bin Laden, and shortly after he went to work for Salim bin Laden, he made a $10,000 investment, probably on behalf of bin Laden, into Arbusto Energy, which was George W.'s startup company. But another thing that's interesting to point out about the World Assembly of Muslim Youth is where it's located, because it's in Falls Church, Virginia. Now, that's a big proximity alert going off right there, because that's so close to CIA headquarters at Langley in Virginia. And if you look into Osama's background, what you find is a guy that is essentially a CIA creation. He went to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan around 79. He headed up a group, the Maktab al-Qadamar, known as the MAK. The MAK had money, had weapons funneled to it by the CIA through Pakistan's state security services, the ISI. And so this was basically a CIA-fronted organization. Now, when around 89, when the war was winding down there in Afghanistan, bin Laden was still seen by the agency as being kind of a hero. And we also know that the CIA was very much aware of the fact that Osama bin Laden and his fellow radicals were not contributing anything significant to the anti-communist cause. That they were contributing in no way whatsoever to the fall of communism or to the fall of the Soviet Union. And while they knew that Osama bin Laden was not contributing in any way, shape, or form to that fall, they were still exaggerating the Soviets' capabilities in their annual Soviet military power report.
Well, let me ask you something, if I could, about Osama bin Laden now. Is it clear to you that he was actually in the United States, maybe under the name of Tim Osman, and being shown certain facilities with regard to, shoulder strap nukes and things like that? Do you have anything on that?
No, I've never heard anything about that, actually.
Okay, now I didn't know how that might fit into the whole puzzle. And also, one other thing, and then I think we should do a little ID here, but are there any bin Ladens left in the United States? And I think, were they not operating out of a concern in Boston?
Well, I know that the bin Laden construction firm was here in the United States for a time. Well, what I do know is that they received legal advice from Sullivan and Cromwell. And Sullivan and Cromwell is, of course, probably the most powerful firm on Wall Street. And when you get into that, you're getting into ties back into the Central Intelligence Agency again. Because Sullivan and Cromwell's two primary lawyers were John Foster and Alan Dulles, the Dulles brothers.
Yeah, I'm sorry, again.
Oh, well, we of course have Alan Dulles being a DCI for a time until Kennedy fired him, and we have both of those brothers supervising the writing of the National Security Act of 1947, which led to the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency. And if you look into the background of Sullivan and Cromwell, what you find is a group that has historically supported enemies of the United States. They, for instance, were behind Fritz Thiessen. They were behind I.G. Farben. They were behind General Kurt von Schroeder, who was the Gestapo general. These were all clients of Sullivan and Cromwell. Another interesting thing to draw out, Joseph Trento, a researcher and investigative journalist who has done really great work and who came out with one of the most important books over the Central Intelligence Agency, the Secret History of the CIA. He was able to do an interview with James Jesus Angleton prior to Angleton's death. And nearing the end of his life, Angleton had been basically looked at as a crackpot, as a madman, and he now felt that it was okay to be quite candid about certain things. And so he's sitting there with Joseph Trento, and he says to him, he's like, would you like to know how I got my job at counterintelligence with the CIA? And so, of course, Trento says yes. And he says, well, the way I did it is that I promised I would not administer a polygraph or a background check to Allen Dulles or 60 of his friends because they were so afraid that it would come out that they had dealings with Hitler's pals. You know, so I mean, like the Dulleses, Cromwell, Sullivan and Cromwell, we have this group that has historically been in bed with the enemy, now in bed with the Bin Ladens, and of course it ties us all back to the Central Intelligence Agency. So we know that, you know, there are these ties between the Bin Laden family and the supposed hollowed halls of officialdom and of legitimacy in Wall Street and in the government.
We also had that strange situation down here, which Tampa Airport finally admitted, that TIA was the site where at least one and perhaps two jets from Raytheon flew out members of the Saudi royal family and perhaps those of Bin Laden as well. This happened a few days after 9/11. I won't say in violation, but let's say they were spared the no-flight moratorium that took place then. Do you remember that story at all?
Yes, I remember that story.
Interestingly enough, too, that the woman who broke the story is a reporter for the St. Petersburg Times. She's also the reporter who called out Daddy Bush's lying about the Iraqi army massing on the Kuwaiti border, when she got a look at what was taking place through a Soviet bird overhead. And so she broke two stories twice that were not flattering of the Republicans, and she's still living to this day and writing for the St. Pete Times. Go figure. We're talking with Philip and Paul Collins. They've been with us many times before, and at this time, want to remind you also that you listen to the Grassy Knoll. And would you guys tell us once again where people can go to hit the information and the titles that you have out there?
Go ahead, Phil. Sure. Well, we currently have out an expanded, revised edition of The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship. That's available through BookSurge, the book publishing company BookSurge. You can get it at www.booksurge, BOOKSURGE.com. And you can also find all of our writings and some archived audio of our interviews at www.conspiracyarchive, all one word, conspiracyarchive.com/commentary with a capital C /Collins with a capital C .php. And we're also now a regular columnist for the ACL Report, which is the official publication of the nationally syndicated radio talk show Closer Look, hosted by Michael Corbin. And you can get that magazine at www.4, a closer look.com. And also coming soon, the e-book version of the expanded revised edition of The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship will also be available there as well. So that gives people something to look forward to, and it gives them an electronic version of the book, which might actually even feature additional graphics and what have you.
I'm going to ask you to do me a favor.
Sure.
Since we plug Corbin so much in this show, tell Corbin you got to plug me once in a while.
Sure.
No problem. We are not jealous here at the Knoll. This is the greatest garage show in America. Also, folks, if you want to ask a question, make a comment to the Collins brothers, you can do so. If you want to send an email, do such to Vyzygoth@hotmail.com. And if you want to send an IM, if you're using Yahoo, it's Viz1400. And if you're using MSN, it's Vyzygoth. And now back to our regularly scheduled show. That was easy for me to say. Is Paul back to life again?
Yeah, I'm still hanging in there.
Okay, buddy. He's going to get about 24 minutes left.
Okay, well, we know that that Robert Gates, the deputy director at the Central Intelligence Agency, in front of Congress in '92, told us all that evidence was being kept from President Reagan about the Soviets' military capabilities, and that they were being exaggerated in the Soviet military power annual report that was given to the president, straight up into 1990, and so as to continue to justify sending all this aid to Osama bin Laden and to his radical friends. So why are you sending, them support if you know that they're making no significant contribution to the fight against communism? Yeah, at this point, bin Laden had pretty much outlived his usefulness, at least in terms of the anti-Soviet crusade. I mean, he really wasn't serving much of a function there, but for some reason they were still propping him up, which seems to suggest that they had other designs and other plans in mind for bin Laden. It becomes obvious that the agency obviously wanted to keep him around in spite of his irrelevance in the Cold War crusade, because they needed some kind of enemy at a future date. And what you have to understand about the power elite is that by and large they are not an improvisational crew. They don't do anything off the cuff. They run off of 10 and 20 and 30-year plans. A good example of what I'm talking about, there's a book out now called Presidential Doodles. And it's not a conspiratorial book, but it's basically what the title implies. It's a book that looks into different drawings and scribblings and doodlings that presidents would do in the course of a work day. And so I thought, it would be interesting to look at it and to, get some little historical footnotes from it, because that's all I thought that it was worth. I thought, well, gee, when you look in the scribblings and doodlings of a president, you could make up one book about Reagan all by itself, But it was actually one very interesting doodle in it, and it goes back to John F. Kennedy. In this doodle, he had a piece of paper, and in the center of the piece of paper were the numbers 911, and then it was circled. And then down at the bottom corner of the paper was written the word conspiracy. So, now we can't draw anything proof positive from that. We can't conclusively say anything about that. For all we know, it means that he was going to meet with Marilyn at 11 after 9 o'clock, and the conspiracy was that he had to keep Jackie out of the loop so that he ended up not sleeping on the couch and everything. But there's also this possibility that the whole idea was floating around Washington even that far, that long ago. Yeah, we know that at the time in the same, in the same vicinity historically, that already plans involving state terror were already being, floated about. For instance, Operation Northwood, right, which involved, of course, the carrying out of terrorist acts in order to create a pretext for a war with Cuba and with Castro.
But do you want to get more specific about what two of those scenarios were?
Well, one of them was actually going against America's space race against the. One of them was against airliners.
Mm-hmm.
And all, and then another one involved if I remember correctly, it was the launching of the ship to the moon and everything. And
yes.
It would have involved an act of terrorism against our own, space industry.
Well, that's why when people who want to, I don't know, we're not going to get into 9/11 now, but the thing is, if there was complicity by our government in 9/11, which I believe there was, if nothing else, turning the other way, the Joint Chiefs offered Kennedy the let's shoot down an airliner and blame it on a Cuban MiG, or, and it gets better, swap out the airliner and put up a drone and shoot that down.
Mm-hmm.
Which always begs the question, what happened to the people? And that's what they asked this day in 9/11. But the thing is, they were willing to do it then. And so 40 years later, would we be surprised to see that it was still not a viable plan?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But another target of the Greencrest raids was this computer software firm known as P-Tech.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based in Boston. And this company has government contracts with the Air Force, with the Energy Department, with the FBI. And one of the firm's main investors was Yassin El-Qadi. And El-Qadi was designated under the Emergency Economic Powers Act by the Bush administration as a terrorist financier. And when people involved in P-Tech, people working for the company came forward and became whistleblowers and tried to let the FBI know about this guy and let them know about terrorist activity coming out of P-Tech, the Bureau didn't do anything with the information that they were given. And the FAA's computers were done by this company prior to 9/11, and it basically has their programs have a tremendous capability of allowing somebody to compromise the system, so to speak. Well, P-Tech is still floating around. In 2002, 6 months after the administration had basically placed it on this list of possible terrorist fronts. And one of the places that they ended up landing was at the door of J.P. Morgan Chase. Now, the big consultant, Indira Singh, who many people have probably heard numerous times on Michael's show, A Closer Look, had basically invited them in to give a presentation. Well, during their presentation, they had a customized demo that they ran for Morgan Chase. She started to come to the conclusion that something just wasn't right here. Something smelled funny. So she started to make contact with individuals that she knew with a respected industry figure. And she found out that Yassin El-Qadi was tied to P-Tech. And this, of course, upset her, and she ended up going to the FBI with this information, and they told her that they couldn't do anything with it. And then she also went to her bosses at Morgan Chase, and they introduced her to an individual called whose position was the general auditor. But he told her that for the real purposes of what he did at Morgan Chase, that he was known as the chief thug. And the riot act that he gave her is that she could either shut up, enjoy the ride, and stay with Morgan Chase, or she was going to be kicked out. And so the question that I raised was, why would a group like Morgan Chase be tied to terrorists? And there's, of course, the financial considerations. They probably thought there was a lot of money to be made and a profit from joining up with P-Tech on this kind of endeavor. But there's also another possibility that one has to consider too. There's a deeper motivation here at work. Before it was Morgan Chase, this firm was actually two institutions, and one of those institutions was the Morgan Bank. And Morgan Bank founder was J.P. Morgan, and J.P. Morgan had gone to only one university in all of his life, and that was Göttingen in Germany. And Göttingen was a center for Hegelian thought and for what Anthony Sutton calls Hegelian activism. And we know that this Hegelianism actually rubbed off on J.P. Morgan because Hegelianism was his whole approach to the American political landscape. When he was here and when he was still alive, he used all sides against one another. And if you read Tragedy and Hope, you'll see that this rich capitalist was actually involved in building up the American capitalist left. And that's probably what we have here going on, is the Hegelian tradition of the Morgan firm continuing even after the merger with Chase. And what we have is we have them building up the dialectical camp of Islamo-fascist terrorism. And what you have is you have America acting as the thesis, clashing with Islamo-fascism as the antithesis. And the synthesis is the rise of American empire. And another individual that we have to look at when we look at P-Tech is we have to look at Chertoff, Michael Chertoff, because when Greenquist went after P-Tech, the Justice Department and the FBI basically flipped its lid. The FBI tried to step in and tried to take control of the investigation. But then when the Greenquist Task Force was going to be subsumed by Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff, who was at the time the DOJ Criminal Division Chief, pushed with the FBI for the FBI and for its parent, the Justice Department, to actually take over Greenquist. And of course, this would have been a bad idea because they would be able then to sabotage all of Greenquist's efforts. And all it just goes back to the old saying of keep your friends close and keep your enemies even closer. But Michael Chertoff, of course, is related to this individual named Ben Chertoff, who had written a piece for Popular Mechanics, which basically, that piece for Popular Mechanics knocked down a bunch of 9/11 strongmen strawmen, in an attempt to make all individuals asking questions about 9/11 look like baseless conspiracy theorists and all. So, that's what I ultimately say at the end of the whole P-Tech affair is Grover Norquist really afraid about civil rights, because civil rights don't really have anything to do with P-Tech. Instead, it's got a lot to do with terrorists receiving protection from the FBI and doing business with a major Wall Street firm. Now, the keystone of the network that Greenquist was investigating was a group called the SAR Foundation. And I want to speak, we're not going to have time on the air today to do this, but I want to speak about them again at a later date, and I'm going to write an article that expands upon the SAR Foundation. Well, the SAR Foundation is connected to a guy named Khalid bin Mahfouz. And people should recognize Mahfouz because he was the director of the BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. And we know BCCI because of all the different shady characters that were involved, from Abu Nidal, the Palestinian terrorist, to Manuel Noriega from Panama.
And Clinton too, wasn't it? Wasn't Clinton involved in that deal?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people, you surprised what names drop out on that one. But what was very interesting to find was that the Central Intelligence Agency was actually trying to cover up the BCCI scandal. In '86, they put out a report over BCCI that simply referred to the bank's methods as unorthodox and unconventional. And then they came out with a later report, which was just a 30-page document that said that the bank was a source of undetermined reliability, and left it at that. And the reason that the CIA was stonewalling and being so secretive about BCCI would come out later with Richard Kerr, who was acting as DCI prior to Robert Gates getting in '91. And what Kerr basically admitted was that the CIA held accounts at BCCI. And he said that the accounts were ordinary and were lawful and honest. But then that begs the question, why did you cover up for so long? And probably the reason why was because $2 billion in U.S. aid went through that bank to the Mujahideen rebels, who, of course, were receiving support from the CIA and were made up of people that had been largely of people who had been radicalized by textbooks made by the Agency of International Development. And now people might ask, who's the puppet master behind BCCI? Well, it wasn't Reagan, even though a lot of this was happening under Reagan's time in office. Reagan, remember, he was 70 years old when he came into office, and all. He was probably the oldest man ever to be inaugurated as president then and now. Mm-hmm. And many of us know that he was very much showing signs of senility even then and all. But if you look at George H.W. Bush, he actually looks like the primary manipulator behind BCCI, and he ties into BCCI through a Little Rock billionaire by the names of Jackson Stevens. And Jackson Stevens, who was a contributor to Bush through Team 100, which was a Republican group which the membership in required that you make a $100,000 donation to Bush's election campaign. And Marianne Stevens, Jackson Stevens' wife, was back in '88 the chairman of the Bush for President drive.
Also, don't you have a connection too between Daddy Bush and the Bin Ladens?
Oh yeah,
through Carlisle, and also Carlisle, right?
Once again, Carlisle to Arbusto Energy. Well, Harkin Energy actually ties in a way. But when Daddy Bush was dethroned, people thought, well, great, maybe we'll get some truth with Bill Clinton. And the truth of the matter is that when Bill Clinton was running for governor, he found himself in like a very bad. He was just in a bad way back in 1990 when he was running. And financially, he was not going to make it. He wasn't staying above water. And so Stevens came forward and was able to get $100,000 raised up for him and a $2 million line of credit with Worthing National Bank. So you have Jackson Stevens not only behind Bush, but behind Clinton. So that stuff wasn't going to, the stuff over BCCI was not going to come back in any way on Daddy Bush because Bill Clinton owed himself to Stevens as much as George Bush. And so you weren't going to have, some kind of turning on old man Bush.
Well, just one other thing too, real quick. I often wondered sometimes if that was just the laundering of the money that Clinton probably was making furtively as the Emperor of Arkansas with the Mina drug connection.
It's possible.
I mean, it is. I mean, I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah, it's possible. But the important thing to see is that some of the same power elites that were behind George H.W. were actually behind Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton decided to run for president, who was standing behind him but Pamela Harriman, who was, of course, the widow of I believe it was April. And and this is the guy that had set up with Prescott Bush, the Union Banking Corporation, and so the idea that these guys were going to actually let anything serious come out about one another was just laughable. Yep. And all that, I believe that they didn't really like one another, and that if Bush could have dethroned Clinton and vice versa, they would have, but they weren't going to say anything that would let stuff fall out about the power elites that were behind them.
Well, don't you feel, I mean, since Reagan was assassinated, a month or so into his presidency, the fact that Ronnie was electable and George wasn't, the fact that Ronnie had to take Daddy Bush as a running mate, though he didn't like him. I mean, we could really look at a continuum from Reagan's 2 terms, where Daddy Bush was president, Bush's presidency, 2 of Clinton, and now 2 of son Bush. I mean, you really have the same two-headed hydra, don't you?
Almost. It's almost exactly like that. Now, Clinton was almost knocked out of power by individuals that were tied to Bush and all, but he had basically set up an insurance for himself. And guys, just because you're done using me doesn't mean that I'm going away. And for instance, we know that Carl Baca had shown up at Gary Webb's doorstep with these highly sensitive grand jury transcripts, which are nearly impossible to get, that became the basis of his book Dark Alliance, and that she was set to marry Carlos Latier, who had been released from prison by the Clinton administration, and who had landed in prison because of George H.W. Bush, and we get this idea that this was some kind of Clinton operation to let them know, look, if the impeachment goes forward, I'm going to drag you guys all down with me, and it's also interesting that 1 hour after Henry Hyde had announced impeachment plans, that the Inspector General's Volume 2 of the report over CIA involvement in drug smuggling was released on the internet, and Bill Clinton's the DCI at the time was a Clinton appointee, even though the Congress was primarily Republican.
Also, if I could, just one interesting element also with Lederer, he disappeared from the federal prison system.
Mm-hmm.
At the time that Chandra Levy was an intern working for the Federal Prison Bureau.
That's right.
That gets weird.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't mean to cut you off, but I mean, like, folks can also read about that, read that article on the net. What I wanted you to do, if without trying to frustrate you, when you wrote this article, though, I mean, when you stand back from it, why did you write it, and what does it say about what's going on?
Well, what it says about what's going on is that America, the reason that we find ourselves in this mess is because we no longer have, in my estimation, an effective internal security apparatus that would basically look into the backgrounds of different government employees and see if there's any conflict of interest there that would warrant taking them out of government. And that would basically break the connection not only between government employees and these terrorists, but also between the government employees and the power elite. Now, the way that we got our internal security apparatus stripped probably goes back to the McCarthy era. Now, McCarthy's another one of those characters that some people believe was a demagogue and other people believe was a martyr. And I, again, believe that it was somewhere in between. The truth is somewhere in between with that. If he had continued working with Kennedy, he probably would have been a hero. His problem is one man, Roy Cohn, which is a guy that you could trust probably as far as you could throw. This man was tied into the power elite, tied to the process church. He was being used to manage McCarthy, and McCarthy was actually profitable for a time for the power elite because he got everybody's attention diverted onto domestic communism and away from the activities of the power elite. And what happened was that when McCarthy wanted to go after William Bundy, because William Bundy had made a contribution of about $100 to Alger Hiss's defense fund, people got excited because a lot of stuff could have come out that really wasn't about communism at all, but was about Skull and Bones, which is an elite conduit. And so at that point, the power elite came to appreciate the fact that an internal security apparatus could be used against them, and they began to build up the left here in this country, and the left used the term McCarthyism to demonize any attempts at internal security, and the different layers of internal security that we had were stripped away. And what we need is an internal security apparatus once more, because working for the government is a privilege. It's not a right. And the reason that we don't have one is because of what it would reveal about certain people in government right now. And I point towards Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz, who is having an affair with this woman, Shaha Riza, who was born in Tunisia and who grew up in Saudi Arabia. Now, she claims that she's a feminist, so that's not exactly a quality that we would find with an Islamo-fascist, but what you got to understand is that in the world of intelligence, there's what is known as legends, which are manufactured background stories that a person has to make them look like something that they are not, so that they have a cover. So this could always be a cover that this lady has. And so the question is Paul Wolfowitz compromised? Is he working for the other side? Now, we won't know. We have no way of knowing unless there was some kind of inquiry by some kind of internal security.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, though, Paul and Phil, and if we can, we'll pick it up perhaps next time we can get together, say in November.
Sure.
All right, listen, thanks very much for spending time with us again. Paul, feel better also, and we'll catch you guys in a couple of weeks.